Chapter 7 of The Second Son, Volumes 1 and 2. This is Volume 1. Chapter 7. Raid awoke to trembling and shifting circumstances, and it occurred to him immediately he was imprisoned in the back of a slowly moving wagon. A black bag had been loosely draped over his head, and his hands were bound behind him. He attempted to recollect his recent past, but mercy was all he could muster. He remembered his last moments of consciousness with her, but nothing more. His thoughts turned to flogging his own hide for his ignorant conceptions about women, as he predicted further evidence could be marshaled to prove his situation was precarious. With his fingers on the cold metal at his wrists, he discovered a chain connected his cuffs to an iron collar around his neck. As his consciousness was restored, a raw and throbbing pain emerged from his ear and electrified him into squirming loudly. Even a most delicate brush from the bag caused him to wince. Footsteps approached the rumbling cart from behind the squire, and in a flash, someone clutched the chain and jerked until his collar suffocated him. A low, contemptuous growl with a distinct Wooloo accent whispered fiercely in his ear, "Keep still. Don't rattle your chains. There's beasts about." He was released, and gasped as he shifted his feet. The squire learned his ankles were handcuffed together, but his legs were otherwise free to move. Another voice from the opposite corner, relieved but still laden with unease, disrupted their almost noisy descent into hell. "Hey, you! You're finally awake. Were you trying to cross the border?" Raid had been imparted with a wisdom by Sir Emerald. Anyone can be an ally, if the times are such. He adjusted his feet and could feel the metal bars beneath them with 4-inch square holes formed by their arrangement. He tried to draw more information about the silence around him, listening intently. Far off, ducks landed on water nearby and quacked the whole way. The shuffle of leaves scraping one another from wind, and the quiet informed him they were in the wilderness. The friendly voice from before spoke again while knocking her boot to his. "Who are you?" He discovered as he moved to answer that the chain joining his collar and his handcuffs were stretched and ran outside the bars, so he was relegated to an inflexible and uncomfortable position as he spoke with a grunt. "I'm nobody." A chuckle revealed the presence of another only 3 feet away and facing him. "Me too. Maybe we're related." Raid gritted his teeth and shot spit and hot breath into the bag against his mouth as his ear radiated with pain. "What's that? Your ear hurt?" The owner of the voice did not wait for him to answer. "They cut your ear off. I've heard rumors of some of the rebels doing this to those they think serve the Empire. Some say it's because the Wooloo lords refuse to listen. A bit on the nose if you ask me. Cutting off our ears to spite our masters." The cage continued rolling on with no one else speaking. Raid turned his mind to Sir Barramon and the certainty that his lord would abandon him. He nearly wept with rage at the many years he spent in the pursuit of valor, only for his odyssey to conclude with the mutilation and torture for knowledge he could not possess. "That won't do you no good," an old man's gruff voice uttered from beside him. "Crying didn't help me is all I'm saying. I'm just a gardener. I don't know nothing." The squire relented and remained quiet, contemplating the many gruesome fates awaiting him before the man across from him spoke. "I was in Capra, at the festival." "Aye, so was I," Raid confessed, as he assembled the events leading to his kidnapping with a hopeless urgency. "I was out on a walk in my lord's garden, and someone thumped me over the head," the old man beside him said as he sighed at the knot on his skull. "I was gathering mushrooms in the Capra forest for my lord, and was chased by 2 men with clubs. Obviously, they caught me," the young woman from the opposite corner explained, irritated. "The rebels must be quite desperate for information if they are taking the likes of us," the squire across from him began with a dreadful analysis. "We are of little value to the nobility, so taking us is of little consequence. Do you think our lords are going to beg the council to arrange an investigation into our disappearances? That we will be given the same justice as Lord Houvier? To believe so would be foolish and naive. We are, all of us, doomed." Raid was predisposed to accepting this line of thinking. The unpleasant symptoms of anxiety took over as he cursed Sir Barramon and all other lords, save for Sir Emerald. He could summon no useful information for which he could bargain his life, making certain his abduction would be all the more disagreeable. The methods of extracting information, erroneous or truthful, had been perfected by either side, and the entire affair had been driven both to such bitterness that being captured by the enemy offered no other prospect except torture and death. He reasonably concluded he had to escape. Raid inquired quietly. "I don't know," the man across from him admitted. Beside the squire, the man was sniffing. "We're in the Palo Mountains. I can smell the fields of white crocus flowers and himja weed. I used to grow those," the last leaving his lips, burdened by immense sorrow. "By the gods, what are we doing there?" the man seated before him cried, stirring bleakness in them as they silently calculated the distance from their loved ones. The young woman from the corner speculated. Perhaps they went across the eastern border into Brelian, then went north through the Palo Mountains. And once we are far enough, we will turn west again, and they will take us into the rebels' territory in the north. The man across from them addressed the group bearing suspicions. His following contentions would only provoke despair, but he lamented anyway. "We're not worth the trip. They'll kill us sooner than that. We'll never see North Wooloo." His last words compelling them all to contemplate when that moment would come. The squire surrendered to reflexes of their distant polite society. "I'm Raid Aranon. It's nice to meet you all." "No offense, friend, but I'd trade ever crossing paths with you from my own bed right about now." Ow. The man across from him complained, "And I'm Pero Verone." "Sixby Fulbit," the woman in the corner revealed, and Raid's ear perked at the mention of her surname. "Fulbit," he began as he wished he could look upon her face to see if any resemblance to the late knight was expressed by her parentage. "You share a name with Sir Amaro." "He's a distant relative," she groaned. "A second cousin, I think. We called him Uncle. Not enough shared blood from my family to benefit from his station except to get the job I had. I suppose I'll have to thank him when I see him shortly, God's willing." Silence proceeded for too long a period, and having been left unaddressed, the old man stated to sarcastic effect, "I'm Durgis Wiley, if anyone cares." He finished by griping for a spell about disgracious young people, and dismissed himself from the remainder of the conversation. Raid wished to discuss his revered master with Sixby, but he could think of no line of questioning she might find presently amenable. He heard the horses huffing as they pulled the cart up a hill, slowly ascending with the bars rumbling and vibrating beneath their feet. The squire occupied himself by attempting to shift the bag over his head so he could look upon something other than darkness. Dried blood had drenched his blue jerkin and was lit briefly by the afternoon sun. He dwelt on images of his own maimed appearance, and they consumed the whole of his mind. He could feel where his ear once was warm, and had delivered his thoughts to the inconceivable pain those who die by infection endure in their final days. "How long has it been since the Emperor's birthday?" he asked, trusting his brain to welcome the reprieve from the torment of his obsessive thinking. Perry's answer was laconic and unhelpful. "Days? I've no idea. I used to know him when I was little," Sixby started, ignoring his question, but drawing Raid's attention anyway. "He taught me how to fight with my hands." "He taught me as well," he exclaimed, and retreated from his excitement to continue quietly. However, shame began to thrive in his masked countenance the longer he went on. "I squired for him. I was with him in Victorious." "You saw him die," she guessed as her heart twinged at his memory, and her eyes suffered, in secret, the symptoms of her grief. "No," he explained. "He sent me away before Romelia came. I'm alive because of him." "My ma told me he took on a new squire," she said, warmly, smiling as her recollection returned. "How'd you get caught then?" "A girl drugged me," Braid confessed straight away, despondently, apprehensive about uttering falsehoods so close to his death. Sixby sighed, her gloom growing with the familiar tale. "Yeah, me too." She changed to a lighter subject. "Last I seen Uncle, he was bigger than a tree trunk, and shit, you don't sound much bigger than me. Where'd he find you? Don't tell me you were an orphan." The squire would have pleaded for discretion from her, as the half-dozen guards of the prison cart had settled into a silence, and could likely overhear every word they exchanged. "The time for secrets has passed." Sixby's once heartened voice withered as she spoke. She talks the truth, Squire Young, a Gildan woman he had not yet heard speak gleefully declared from the front seat of the cart. No use in quiet keeping now. Soon you'll be begging to let you talk. The others cackled at her dark humor, and the horses snorted before whipping their heads agitated. Move it, goddamn! The Gildan woman cursed, slapping the reins against their flanks. The left horse reared up in terror, seemingly at its bindings as his colleague discharged his tremendous strength to snap the wooden planks, enslaving them to the cart. Raid's breath was evicted when the first horse kicked himself free and took flight without his friend. Suddenly, a man's voice cried out, "Dire Bear!" They could only listen helplessly as their half-dozen kidnappers armed themselves to fend off the apex predator. But those warriors were unaware they operated under a fatal delusion, as the second horse fell into a frenzy, and in the course of escaping, threw the wagon on its side and forsook them all to the wilderness of the Palo Mountains. Lying on his back, Raid heard a deeper, steady pounding approach, and the Gildan woman shrieked at the realization their mighty foe was merely a cub. On all fours, the mother towered over her offspring, appearing gray in fur and nearly 7 feet tall and 10 feet from head to tail. When his wits were restored, she caught the sound of Sixby and Pero being strangled as they hanged from the bars of the cart with the collar around their necks. He knew their legs must be chained to the bench, so he shot his feet bound into Pero's chest and bleated to Durgis, "Use your legs! Hold her up!" The elder gardener presented no resistance or hesitation as he relieved the pressure on Sixby's throat so she could draw breath. The bear cub awaited nearby as her mother galloped thunderously in every direction, ripping and tearing flesh, and coating her gray fur in that sanguine delight, the breadth of her ruthlessness measured in their corpses. The spears could but prick her, and only served to enrage the giant into amputating the strong arms that wielded those weapons with a single bite. Her cub ran the Gildan woman down in the beaten path, disemboweling her and laying on her belly unconcernedly to gnaw on her neck before the last of their convoy fled to the cage and unlocked it to hide within from the murderous beasts. The gray and reddened bears returned and heaved themselves atop the cage in frustration as they attempted to break it asunder. Raid's hands were drawn up into the small of his back as they slid the wagon upon the ground, knocking it about, but unable to turn it over. The squire could hear the cage creaking under the weight of the mother bear as she peered down at them, huffing and drooling blood and saliva onto them. He found the irony in being grateful the metal bars imprisoning him were so well crafted. He felt a warm liquid running down his back and discovered the driver urinating himself. The bear sniffed Sixby's and Pero's hands scarcely extending out of the cage. Exhaustion set into every muscle fiber, but Raid was unwavering in his efforts to keep Pero suspended high enough to breathe. He beseeched the driver, "Unlock the cuffs. We can't hold them forever." "Help us, goddammit. Let us go. Now," Sixby shouted, substituting a longing for compassion for fear. "Shut up," their jailer whimpered as the bears roared and beat at the cage. The 4 prisoners, with all their entreaties and promises of asylum, could not sway him into releasing them from the chains. After an hour or so, the beast departed up the hill, and Raid lost all sensation in his legs. But still, he kept them pressed into Pero's chest as they begged for their captor's mercy. However, a moment later, the driver opened the gate to the cage and climbed out alone. As that final survivor disappeared running opposite the dire bear's direction, Raid wept bitterly at their certain and imminent deaths. Another half-hour proceeded in the quiet as their legs trembled with strain in maintaining their comrades' airways. The bugs and birds bustled in the twilight and sang eagerly for want of conference with another of their kind. But not long after nature's dirge began, Durgis would relent, and his feet tumbled to the floor. Sixby began to suffocate as her conservator lay panting and laboring desperately to lift her again. The old man bellowed in anguish as he spent what remained of his energy to suspend her for a brief moment before his feeble legs collapsed to the ground once more. "Please, don't let go. I don't want her to die," the squire cried. Durgis sobbed as she flailed and rattled her chains, her eyes bulging bloodshot behind the black bag, and saliva dripping from her gaping mouth, bearing the likeness of a fish pulled ashore. Durgis, lift your legs. She's dying. They implored him before Raid strained to elevate her himself and discovered it was impossible without being strangled by his own collar and allowing Pero to suffer her fate instead. Scene 2. The old man's wailings and cries for forgiveness were disquieting as Sixby's struggles steadily deteriorated until they ceased altogether, and she hanged above them, gently swinging. Pero's heart thumped as he felt the muscles in the squire's legs trembling to sustain him. Raid, please don't let me die. Please don't let go. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. His words trailed off into prayers he whispered for deliverance from his peril. Durgis howled upon reflecting on the notion he would likely be devoured in bits, as he possessed no mechanisms to defend himself from any creature keen on making ribbons of his flesh. His noisy blubbering disguised the quiet footsteps that approached from outside the prison cart. Pero severed himself from learned courtesies and appealed to his enemy's fear as he roared, "God's damned rebels, let us out!" A new voice replied, crusty, but restrained, "I'm not your driver." The stranger uttered nothing for a spell as he studied the bodies lying in pieces and scattered in the road. "Looks like a couple of dire bears found you." They heard the sound of keys scraping and clinking, and the stranger cautioned them before opening the cage door and climbing inside. "Now, I'm going to unlock these cuffs and free you, but I'll kill you just as quickly if you don't do as I command." "We'll do whatever you say," Pero pleaded before collapsing into irresistible sobs at being spared a once certain death. Yes, we're friends. Please, help us," Durgis cried as his bowels loosened in sheer respite, leaving his trousers in ruin. "Stay in the cage and count to 1,000. Keep them bags on your head. You do that, and I'll let you live." The stranger's silence followed as he awaited an answer. "Yes," they clamored as he first undid the collar around Pero's neck, and then his cuffs and ankles. Raid groaned happily as his charge fell atop him and climbed out of the cage, still hooded, and plunging to his knees amongst the grass before lying on his back, thanking the gods for their mercy and the squire for his resolve. His comrades, however, endured considerable fatigue, brought forth by the show of fraternity amidst their shared plights. Raid and Durgis's legs failed to support the two as they stood to leave the mobile cell. The stranger drew a sword from its sheath and cautioned them while they were still blinded. "I'm going to be on my way. Start counting." They elected not to delay in complying, starting at the number 1 loudly as his footsteps became fainter with every moment that passed. Despite the apparent absence of local sentient life, they reluctantly obeyed their liberator in full, and reached 1,000 after several minutes of increasingly hasty counting. Their eyes admitted dim light through the black bag, but once revealed, they shuddered them at the richness of the setting sun, and the burnished horizon would soon vanish, so darkness might swallow the valley they now lay in. Their faces cleared one another in the coming night. Durgis lay in the shade of a thorn bush he crawled to, hidden behind his hands and sobbing as they looked down upon him with pity. Pero would disappear for a spell, referring to similar sensations, and the same personal corporeal feelings that the old gardener was obliged to reveal without consent. And Raid discovered, as his senses were refunded, they all smelled rather revolting. Once their beating hearts were nearly stilled, Pero spoke up, returning from relieving himself nearby and washing up in the lake. "We need to get away from the cart. Rebels might return soon." The squire offered consolation to Sixby's spirit that now resided in him, looking to remove her body and bury her with all the honors he could name. His voice arose again with Raid ruminating as he spoke. "We don't got the time to bury her. Can either of you feel your legs yet?" He slapped his thighs, and the tingling stream through the muscles confirmed that they had recovered little since released from their prison. Durgis would claim the same, but worry grew in his face as it seemed the gods would impose immense pain on his hips to replace the terrible death averted by their emancipator. The gardener lay moaning and worrying his present company. The noise might endanger them. Pero shook his head at the squire in subtle conspiracy against the old man. "All right, I'm going to carry you both out of view." An ancient water bowl tree was moss-covered and stretched out over the lake a few hundred feet east of them. Each branch bore a perfectly shaped bowl at irregular intervals, large enough to accommodate a symbiotic arrangement between most species of birds their progeny, and the tree. Pero was released with the prospect of potable water as he groaned to lift Raid over his shoulder. "I'll come back for you," he reassured Durgis as they made the trek across the meadow to the lake and its companion tree. Pero spoke to the squire briefly. "The rebels might figure out we ain't getting there and come looking for us. We might have to leave 'em behind." Raid ignored the last, unconvinced any amount of distance would supply them respite from the war. The rebels were tenacious and possessed identical weaponry, along with the luxury of troops principled with devotion for one another and fighting for what they believe is justice. This phenomenon of fellowship exists within formal standing armies as well, but decays during years of peace. Rumelia offered change bolstered by her claims of good faith governance. The people on both fronts yearned for the love of their respective regimes, and so they deferred any criticisms for their authority for after their reunification, and further claimed all detractors from this compulsory camaraderie were traitors for the enemy. Durgis complained from beside the cart as his hips ached and throbbed, reluctantly entertaining regret for trying to save Sixby's life, despite the hopelessness he named over and again. He wondered if witnesses had not been present, would he have forsaken her sooner, if only to spare her the terror, and him the agony with which he now contends. Shame overwhelmed his spirit only a moment before dissipating with the agony of small fractures expanding in his femur, rendering the tissue surrounding it inflamed from need of repair. Pero set Raid down, crouched beside him, and revealed his proposal to abandon the gardener in an effort to spare them both. "He's louder than we was when the bears came. Ain't no way we gonna make it with him caterwauling like that. We gotta leave him." His final declaration brought them to shudder and reproach. The logic he advanced was unimpeachable. The squire was certain that death could not be stayed if they remained with the old men. But Sir Imro judged valor a virtue superior to practicality, and this philosophy he branded on Raid's mind and heart. He was, therefore, enslaved to his honor, but a deeper, unflinching instinct to endure excited profound conflict in his heart. However, they perceived the sound of hoofbeats approaching the prison cart, and decided they were absolved from committing the ostensibly necessary sin of deserting their elderly companion. Scene 3. They watched as riders in the colors of the rebels jerked Durgis to his feet as he was addressed by another studying the landscape, and the body of Sixby hanging in the cage. Pero dropped Raid carelessly in the shade of the water bowl tree, and uttered the sincerest regret of his life. "I'm sorry," and he swiftly scrambled away towards the edge of the valley and over a hill before disappearing entirely. The squire offered no protest as he watched him go, but would entertain, and even assert, misanthropic notions in private for the rest of his days as a consequence. He witnessed the gardener lose consciousness upon being struck in the cheek with a smooth and thick wooden rod. They patted his face until he stirred, and the old man screamed when he discovered he was not waking from a nightmare. He did not resist their violence for long before confessing the location of his ally. Durgis pointed towards the tree where Raid lay, and the rebels crossed the meadow with their gaze fixed on the squire's resting place. The leader dismounted his horse and rested his hand upon a low-hanging branch as he stared down at Raid almost cheerfully. "Who freed you?" The old man claimed he doesn't know. The squire shrugged as a gesture to approximate an unruly reticence, and the man spoke up again, chuckling. I'm anxious to hear you sing." He yanked Raid to his feet and saw him struggling to remain upright. "You can barely stand as well. Where is the last prisoner? If he's crippled in the same manner, then surely he must be close." He clicked his tongue, and his companion initiated a manhunt. A pregnant pause ensued, and the man mocked him. "Your friend, he abandoned you. I see the affection you imperialists have for one another is certain to eventuate in victory, yes?" His contempt for the insurgent was so apparent, it provoked him into kicking the squire in the face. Raid collapsed into the dirt and spit blood from his mouth as the leader withdrew a step and reviewed the effects of his assault. "Look at me like that again, and I'll pluck one of your eyes out." There was usually no forewarning offered such as was just expressed. The people of this world, Raid found, often wore a particular and easily discernible expression when they aimed to commit acts of cruelty. And when sadists, the hobbyists to the professionals, suffer deadly uncertainties in times of war, their pursuit of that pleasure transforms into a perceived moral and ethical obligation to visit immense pain upon their declared enemies, inviting a cycle of retribution, if only to ensure they depart their mortal coil with a legacy of patriotism. The black-haired devil stood over Raid with a boot pressed firmly into his neck and hissed, "Get up! We're leaving." The manhunt resolved unsuccessfully. Raid's hands were then bound, and the ropes used for this purpose extended to Durgis, restraining them together as they trudged behind the rebels mounted on their horses. Attempts to obscure their vision with the black bags resulted in both of the prisoners tumbling into the dirt every 10 feet and being dragged upon tripping on unseen obstructions in the beaten path. They were given leave to remove the hoods and continued marching well into darkness. For 2 hours, Durgis did not restrain himself in alerting the rebels to his misery originating from the pain in his hips. He sobbed and begged for reprieve, and eventually they relented and remained on their horses as the gardener rested on a small boulder hidden from the moonlight by the mountains. "They don't even have to torture me anymore. I'll tell them everything they want to know," he confessed to Raid as he studied a budding white crocus. But the squire resented the old man for his cowardice and would speak no words of affirmation. "Did you hear me, y'all? I'll tell you anything." "Just let me go," he exclaimed, and his declaration was received with raucous laughter. The horses threw their heads and huffed before restlessly weaving back and forth on the road impatiently. Durgis sighed as he contemplated his grim future, and nearly turned around when he heard a light tap upon the boulder he leaned against. In an instant, the old man shrieked as the massive green and black striped head of a mountain tiger appeared with its teeth firmly hooked around his neck and chest, and shattering the bones beneath with the colossal strength of its jaws. He nearly gasped, but blood poured from his throat, and he groaned feebly as the predator effortlessly dragged him up the mountain, his body bouncing against the rocks as it went limp, and the fear dissolving from his paled face. The horses and their riders sprinted away, but one rebel remained secured by the rope to the prisoners. He ripped its sword from its sheath and cut their shared bindings before making his escape with the others. Raid sprinted through the valley away from his captors and the beast with his prey. The shadow of a pine tree grove gave him refuge as he studied the road for more threats, and his breath was restored upon hearing a familiar voice. "A lot of good it did saving you. Just one left, huh?" He peered into the darkness with terror consuming the whole of his courage, but realized upon inspection of the face of the speaker it bore no such reference to a want for violence. 2. Pero escaped as well. The gruff voice approved. "So what are you going to do now?" Raid embraced his undue faith in this man and told him the truth. "Try to figure out how to get back to Capra." "You can't do that." Embers smoldered in a smoke pipe and lit his visage for a moment, but nothing in it was gleaned by the squire. Raid did not initially appreciate his advice, but his views on the matter would change dramatically as the stranger explained. "You've been marked. If you go home, and you're missing an ear like you are, do you think they'll believe you escaped the rebels, and they just let you go?" The squire took solace briefly in the honor he was sure his society possessed and claimed. "I'll explain to them what happened." "And what will you say?" the sage began with his disbelief at the squire rising aloft. "That the rebels delivered you to the Palo Mountains, but a dire bear killed your prisoner escort, and then a lone man came along and unshackled you and let you go. Then you were captured again, but managed to escape them a second time, as well as a mountain tiger." The man shook his head with remorse. "No. You will arrive in Capra, and hope to explain to the council what occurred. They will not believe you, as your tale sounds like nothing more than a desperate and absurd fiction, and they will assume the rebels let you go, because you have elected to become a spy, or you gave up valuable enough information to spare your life. You will no longer be a squire for Wooloo, and you will certainly not be knighted. If they allow you to live, you'll likely be rounded up with the rest of their citizens they think have become spies the next time they have an inquisition, and be hanged. You've become no different from me. You have no home. Still Morrow? Raid whispered with the air lingering just beyond the reach of his lungs. The pipe glowed again as he inhaled. Aye. The squire was in despair that his liberation was accomplished by one of the most infamous traitors his country has ever known. His humiliation at this fact enraged him, and he indicted his savior. You killed Lord Houvier, and so many more with your... Still Morrow reprimanded the ignorant squire by elucidating the malice that was crusaded for by his murdered lord. Say treachery or cowardice, and I'll remove all from you that dangles. That shit hunted and killed everyone that served with me. And what does it matter, boy? Your loyalty is worthless to them now. An enemy to peace, they would shit on your head, then pull the lever. Raid thought a moment, and offered his last repudiation to so offensive of an idea as abandoning his country. And his knight, Sir Barrimon, will testify to my character. You really believe that? And even if he did, he pecked the mouth of his pipe and exhaled loudly, would his testimony secure your freedom with the council? Words of potent retort could not be conceived by the squire, and nothing further could be summoned to convince himself of the absurdity. He knew still Morrow was right. They would not believe him, and he could not return home. Where am I to go, then? Raid questioned with ferocity bubbling in his voice, as he mourned his exile from a country so vast the world over feared its name, until Ramilia's rebellion. Still Morrow dumped the ash on the ground from his pipe, and rubbed the burning ember to dust with his foot. Come with me. That's the end of chapter 7. Hope you enjoyed it.